I know I've missed the last 2 shows, guys, recently, but, I was on a whirlwind tour on the East Coast, stopped by Virginia for a couple of days. I thought I was gonna try to meet up with you, Tony, but, didn't have the time. Had to see an eye doctor that, was a specialist there because 'cause I'm having problems with my eyes. It's one of the things that happens when you get older. But, last 2 weeks, man, I've missed your guys' faces. What have you guys been up to?
Oh man, I'm glad that you weren't just going through the motions with the editing. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't even edit the last week's episode. I've just been busy traveling, man. For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, on last week's episode, Tony thought that he had seen me at the optometrist, uh, while he was there a couple weeks ago, and, yeah, that wasn't me. And even if it was me, and why didn't you say something? Why didn't you go like, "Hey, dude, there's Evan," or get a picture? Looks like we can have a doppelganger
It's
contest or something.
it's funny you mention that
No, that wasn't
because
going through your head?
this yesterday actually, our friends texted us in the group chat with my wife and and I apparently have a doppelganger in the Peloton world as an instructor. Now, like I'm an athlete and all, but not a Peloton guy. But there was an uncanny resemblance that like it made me question a lot of things. I'll just throw that out there.
I think I know who that is. I'm a Peloton guy, but I'm more of a Peloton closet rack
We had
guy,
one
where I just hang
for
my clothes up on there.
6 days during the pandemic, and then I said, "Nope, we got to return this. Absolutely not. Like this is not. I can't do this. I can't be a Peloton person." That was it. I haven't been on a bike since.
Goes our Peloton sponsorship.
I also got it during the pandemic, but it's still just sitting there collecting dust, and it's the best coat hanger I've ever had.
Welcome to the Flying Octopus podcast, offering a new perspective on Red Wings hockey, as well as all the important news from around the NHL. And now, here are your hosts, Tony Wolak, Devin Little, and Evan Sabourin.
Hey, it's Carter Bear, and you're listening to the Flying Octopus podcast.
Welcome to episode 82 of the Flying Octopus podcast. I'm your host, Evan Sabourin, joined as always by my cohort, Devin Little. We got a couple things we want to get to today, and we're going to focus a little on the Red Wings draft history, dating back even to the Ken Holland years. We're also going to talk a little bit about these rumors we've been seeing flying all over social media involving Sebastian Cossa. There's been a lot of hints, a lot of insiders have been saying that this is a guy that could possibly be moved. We're also looking at the situation where Kossa's not even the number one goaltender right now for the Grand Rapids Griffins as they continue their playoff push there in the second round. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone where you can find us. Follow us on Twitter at Flying Octopod. You can follow our YouTube channel at The Flying Octopod. And we are on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. That's where we're at. Give us a like, smash that subscribe button. We'd love to hear from you. So let's get started here. I started to like go back and start looking back at past drafts. And I kind of got this kind of sense when, people talk about whether Red Wings don't lack stars. And I think when we say what Steve Yzerman took over for the Red Wings as general manager is that we always say the narrative is always that the cupboard was bare, prospects were bare. And that is true. But when you start to look back at some of these misses, and I know we've gone over these misses before, when you talk about guys like Dennis Cholowski, guys like that were taking Michael Rasmussen, even Gustav Lindstrom in the second round, there were players there that were missed. And this is why I kind of worry about where the amateur scouting was come. Now, obviously, it's not the same with Tyler Wright back then as it is today with Chris Draper and Yzerman now running the show. But I think at some point you have to worry about, talent evaluation because you're not talking about just like misses. You're talking about big time misses. You're not even like drafting a quality player, but you are missing out on what clearly players that could have been stars for this Red Wings team. And, these stars that were drafted back in 2017, 16, 15, these guys are all now players who are in their primes and on playoff teams. So now when you look back at the Yzerman drafts, you have to realize like these guys, a lot of these picks that are coming up haven't even reached their prime. Looking back at 2015, you had on the board after the Red Wings took, Evgeny Svechnikov at 15, guys like Joel Eriksson Ek, Buck Besser, Travis Konechny, Sebastian Aho, Rupe Hintz. We can all agree that those picks are, you can't really argue. Basically, Devin, what I'm getting at is those players drafted in 2015, 2016, 2017, the players that we missed on. Evgeny Svechnikov was taken by Holland in the Tyler Wright core. Dennis Cholowski over guys like Jacob Chychrun, Tage Thompson, Jordan Kyrou, even Alex DeBrincat. 2017, Michael Rasmussen. I mean, you had Jason Robertson falling in the second round there, where the Red Wings selected Gustav Lindstrom, one pick in front of him. Owen Tippett, Nick Suzuki, Martin Netchus, Robert Thomas. I'll even throw in Gabe Velarde. Those guys now, they are 28, 29, heading to 30 years old. They're all in their primes. So when you look back at that, and we say the cupboard was bare. Yes, the cupboard was bare, but these weren't not just misses in the draft. These were major, significant misses in the draft. And I think when you talk about where the Red Wings are today, that this is why this rebuild has taken so long. When you miss on those top picks, especially in the first and the second round, and you not only just miss, you miss badly. I mean, is that not a logical explanation as to why the Red Wings have missed the playoffs the past 10 seasons?
I think it's a logical explanation. I earlier this season on social media, I kind of made the point that we talk about how the Red Wings, aside from Alex DeBrincat, the Red Wings don't really have a scorer. Well, they intended for that to be Filip Zadina, and obviously we know how that played out. And now there's a Filip Zadina-sized hole in the lineup. They were expecting him to be a scorer. And luckily they have DeBrincat, but there's definitely still that goal scoring that's missing. Even like Michael Rasmussen, we talk about how the bottom six doesn't really have an identity. It doesn't really, it doesn't do a whole lot, at least consistently. And at the very least, when they drafted Michael Rasmussen at 9th overall in 2017, at the very least, you had to think that they were hoping he'd be a kind of a tone setter on like a third line center. That obviously he's a big guy. He could have been a tone setter for the bottom six. Hasn't really turned into that. I think he's kind of the quintessential Jersey now, unfortunately. And you think, usually when you think about draft misses, you kind of think about them like within the context of the draft year itself. But like you're saying, Evan, these misses and or not even just the misses, but like the things they intend to do that ultimately don't work out, those have ripple effects. When you're drafting, you're building for the future. You're very rarely building for the following season. You are building for 3, 4, 5, 10 seasons out. And so when you've planned this pick for that time down the road, when you arrive at that point down the road, there's something missing. And I think it speaks to why the cupboard was so bare, like you said. And it speaks to how, at a foundational level, Steve Yzerman had to build the Red Wings up from the ground. Because it wasn't, if he had come in and Filip Zadina was the player that they were hoping he was going to be, I mean, that alone is a huge asset for him to build around. He didn't end up being that kind of player. Talked about Rasmussen, talked about Joe Veleno for God's sakes, right? Like 30th overall, but even he was expected to be, or kind of projected to be, a solid two-way middle six guy. Didn't turn out to be really anything. The ripple effects, and it's also really easy, of course, to kind of get into the hindsight's 2020 stuff. And well, they obviously should have picked Quinn Hughes. Well, no, we all, if you've been following the team for any amount of time, you know that Quinn Hughes wouldn't have been the pick if it wasn't Filip Zadina. Probably would have been Evan Bouchard. Now, don't get me wrong, Evan Bouchard still would be a huge bonus for this team as well. But the conversation with that always centers around Quinn Hughes, and that wasn't even going to happen. So it's a fine line you have to walk between acknowledging the failures that have happened in the past and how they led to where we are, while also acknowledging that like the ideal outcome maybe was never in the plan. Like you mentioned Robert Thomas just real quick. I remember a few months ago when his name was all over the rumor mill heading into the trade deadline. I remember reading a comment from a St. Louis Blues fan talking about how the Blues would be very foolish to trade the greatest draft selection in franchise history, because Robert Thomas wasn't drafted 4th overall or like in a range where you expect to hit. He was drafted later in the first round where you do expect to get a player, but you're not necessarily expecting what Robert Thomas is. And so the fact that they got him and he turned out to be the caliber of player he is, that's why at least that fan sees him as the most successful pick in that franchise's history. And that speaks to how, if the Red Wings would have taken Robert Thomas at their spot, it would have been seen as a crazy pick at the time because he wasn't expected to be Robert Thomas. He was just a decent prospect. So, it's a tricky thing, and I think to properly really peel back the layers of this, you'd almost have to write a whole 2,000-word dissertation on the topic.
Well, here's the thing that I always think about that when I started looking back at all these, and a lot of them I remember, some I didn't, but it's the teams that get those talent evaluations where they're better, where they're getting those guys in the mid first round or early in the second round or mid second round. Those are the teams, and I'm looking at it right here. Look at it. Think about these guys right now when I talked about 2016. Jacob Chitchin, Tage Thompson, Jordan Kyrou, and even DeBrincat. When I start looking back at some of these picks that were missed, and at the time, when you think about it, you have to blame like talent evaluation. I mean, that's basically what amateur scouting department is for. And when you're looking at a player, it's the NHL draft is not an exact science. It never has been. It never will be. It's like that in all professional sports. But the thing is, guess what? That's what you're paid to do. That's what your job is. It's hard to predict the future, but you are paid to do that based on your talent evaluation. There was obviously a problem back then with talent evaluation as far as projection, because these guys are all in their primes and are significant NHL players, some 40 goal scorers, and Svechnikov hasn't been in the league for what? How many years now? I mean, that has a long-term impact, and that's why I feel like the Red Wings are. And you can keep going down the list here, because when I mentioned earlier, when guys like Michael Rasmussen are taking over Martin Necas, who I know a lot of Detroit fans were pining for, Owen Tippett, Suzuki, Thomas, I said Gabe Vilardi, Jason Robertson in the second round over Lidstrom. If you're not seeing that talent right as an amateur scout, then maybe you're not good at your job or haven't been at your job. I know Tony, not a huge Tyler Wright fan, but I didn't even get into 2018 either with the Zadina thing. So these weren't just misses. The Red Wings didn't even gain any value in these picks while losing out on value on guys that the talent evaluators couldn't identify. So you talk about, Quinn Hughes wouldn't have been the pick. The rumor was it would have been Bouchard. Okay, great. Bouchard's in the middle of his prime now. Zadina's out of the league. And that's why, hockey, these players are drafted are so younger, and these guys that we're talking about are missing. Like, look at all of them. Jason Robertson, playoffs. Martin Necas, playoffs. Owen Tippett, playoffs. Nick Suzuki, in the playoffs. Gabe Vilardi was on the President's Trophy team just 2 years ago. Robert Thomas, I know the Blues haven't been good, but they have been a playoff team. It's Jacob Chitrin was Coyotes, who turned into Mammoth in the playoffs. Tage Thompson in the playoffs. It's just, there's a definite correlation to missing out on talent and then taking picks earlier who are complete flops. Listen, you can't call Rasmussen a complete flop for as many NHL games as he's played, but has he ever been the significant player that you think should have been drafted at 9th overall?
If you get Michael Rasmussen in the 3rd round, you feel really good about that pick, but you get him at 9th overall, that's where we are at. And that just kind of shows it's different expectations too, right? Like half of the reason Emmett Finney's such a feel-good story is because he was a 7th round pick. If he was a 1st round pick, you'd still be encouraged by his season this season, but the bar would have been at a different place than where it was because he's a 7th round pick. So, expectations are part of the equation here too. And just 2 thoughts kind of came to mind while you were talking there, Evan. First and foremost, given the 3, 4, 5-ish year span that kind of led to this, this moment in time, it kind of cracks me up because I feel like the Philip Hronek pick is a weird standout amongst all of that, because they whiff here, they whiff here, they whiff here, they trade the Datsuk contract and move back, and then they completely whiff on the Cholowski pick. But with the bonus pick they picked up, they picked Philip Hronek, who is a bona fide top 4 defenseman, and would you can. I think we're at a point now where you can have a pretty decent debate about whether or not it was the right decision trading him to Vancouver those years ago. Obviously, you wouldn't have Axel Sandin Pellikka at that point, but what does that mean? But yeah, it's just funny because now all these misses, and then that's a pretty significant hit out of nowhere. And then the other thought too is it kind of came out of nowhere too, because growing up here in the state of Michigan, and growing up during the era led by Pavel Datsuk and Henrik Zetterberg, you heard nonstop about how the Red Wings were the cream of the crop when it came to finding talent in the draft, and especially outside of the first round too. Obviously Datsuk and Zetterberg weren't first round picks, and there's others throughout the history that have, Sergei Fedorov wasn't a first round pick either. But for my entire childhood and then even my young adulthood, that was the Red Wings' reputation. They find talent. They draft well. And somewhere along the way, it just kind of stopped. And now, and I'm wondering, I know I have a theory about kind of what happened there, but it is jarring to go from a team that was able to that built a reputation around finding about maximizing the value of their picks, is probably the right way of phrasing it, to then a team to then an organization that whiffed so many times that when the next general manager took over, he had basically nothing to build with.
What's your theory then? You can't tease us.
I think at some point, well, first and foremost, and this goes without saying, but there was a lot of luck with the Datsuk and Zetterberg picks. Even when they picked those guys, they weren't expecting them to become franchise cornerstones. So there's definitely a little bit of luck there for sure. But I think with almost everything the Red Wings did from basically 2010 and on, they were extending the streak. And I think that they really were drafting for immediate need rather than future impact, for lack of better words. That, to me, that's the only reason they draft Michael Rasmussen at 9th overall in 2017, their first top 10 pick in decades. And they pick a guy who projects to be a third line center. It's because at the time they needed some size and some potential youth and grit down their lineup. And that's what Michael Rasmussen represented. They drafted Cholowski because they, obviously they were past the Nick Lidstrom era. Danny DeKeyser was there, but they didn't really have anyone else to really build around the left side. I think that was right around the time that they kind of realized Brendan Smith wasn't going to be that guy, so they needed another left-hand defenseman, and so that's what they went and got. And I think that when you're it's kind of like the classic debate that comes around every draft season. It's, do you draft for need or do you draft best player available? And I think that kind of the conclusion we can draw from just the setup of this topic is that if they would have gone best player available in any of these scenarios, they probably at bare minimum still have a player. To what degree of impact that player has, it probably depends, but they probably have a better asset than Michael Rasmussen at this point. Maybe they do have Marty Necas. Maybe they have Nick Suzuki. I even back then, I did not think that Rasmussen was the best player available. I think that he was just the best fit for what the Red Wings needed at the time. And I think that adopting the drafting for need strategy is what ultimately kind of paved the way for them to have more needs than they could properly address.
Yeah, and I want to kind of shift gears here now and start looking at Yzerman's drafts, because I feel Yzerman has hit. I think we can all agree that the first round picks that he has starting with Seider in 2019, Raymond in 2020, those guys have hit. I think it's fairly safe to say that they've hit. The 2021 draft, Simon Edvinsson, Sebastian Cossa, who we'll get to in a minute. There's a little debate about Cossa. I think we're pretty good with Simon Edvinsson. Third round, that year in 2021, they grabbed Carter Mazur. 2022 now, when we're getting to Marco Kasper, that's where I still think you kind of have to cut off the line because the jury's still out on Kasper. I still think there were better picks there. The ones that I listed, possibly Pavel Mintyukov, Connor Geeky, Denton Matachuk, Frank Nazar, and Jimmy Snuggerud. But this is the one that gets me the most, is the second round with Dylan James at 40. And it's not just the Red Wings that missed. Yeah, a lot of guys missed on Lane Hudson at 62. And that one really sticks out to me. But again, he had a good fourth round with Anton Johansson, Amadeus Lombardi. 2023, Nate Danielson, and ASP. Again, jury's still out, but right now they look like safe picks. Some people might not agree with Nate Danielson. A lot of people were talking about Zach Benson. But here's the thing: Yzerman's guys haven't reached their prime yet. A lot of these guys haven't reached their prime, and so it's still building up. But how we just look back at those misses earlier, it just goes to show that those kind of things can have a long-term impact on an organization that has struggled. You said the ripple effect. It's exactly what it is. So I think people have to understand that yes, dude, scouting, not a perfect science. I think the Red Wings had some issues there at the end of Holland's tenure. I still think there's been misses in Yzerman's tenure. Although he has, feel like I said, he's nailed those first round picks. But you look at the second round in 2020, William Wallander taken at 32. Better picks there. JJ Peterka, Luke Evangelista, Brock Faber. I'll throw in Emil Heineman. Second round, they had Theodore Niederbach and Cross Sanas. Better picks there. Mason Lohrei, Will Cully, who I think would have been a great fit for Detroit. Yzerman's third draft, Evanson, Cossa. Better picks here. Wyatt Johnson, maybe Jesper Wallstedt, which was a big dilemma at the time. Olin Zellweger, even Riker Evans. Second round, and this one will hurt too, is Shai Buium. I don't know where his ceiling is at, but Josh Doan, Logan Stankoven, Matthew Nyes, Giannis Moser, even Oliver Kapanen were on the board there. So there have been misses too, but then again in the third round, he came up with Carter Mazur. Again, I'm not going to go through 2022. I just briefly did. But, those guys, they're still young. The jury's still out there. The Red Wings also have never been in the right place at the right time in the right draft. It always feels like, they weren't bad at the right exact time. Obviously, we talk about the lottery luck too, but I still think that they managed out pretty well with the lottery luck that they had when you consider Lucas Raymond and who was taken ahead of him as far as Lafreniere and Quentin Byfield. Stützle, I think, is a star. So, that's a hit or miss. The Seider draft, we've talked about this. I think Seider would have gone too over Jack Hughes. I'm still fine with that. It's a frustrating science, but if the science doesn't go right for you, this is what happens.
You're absolutely right. And I think what it says to me too, so I guess to kind of first reemphasize your point, there's a large portion of Yzerman draft picks right now that it's too early to write off or too early to say they're a success. This jury's still out, like you said. And then for the ones that are in a spot where you can start to make some judgments, they're the Moritz Seiders and the Lucas Raymonds and the Simon Edvindsons of the world, where you're feeling good because they've played hundreds of NHL games at this point. I think, I guess I'll say two things on this. One, and I don't want to get too, I don't want to walk this too far to where I'm starting to say things I'm not meaning, but I do think that Sebastian Cossa, at least right now, is starting to trend in the direction of he's maybe the first significant draft choice during the Yzerman era where, questions are already being asked, but maybe the right phrase would be that it's starting to feel appropriate to question whether or not that was the right pick. I do think I'm not writing this prospect off by any means. It's like we could have a whole segment around Cossa, and we still might, but it's I think my point is that 2021 draft is probably the most recent draft we can look at and draw conclusions from, or at least start to. Because if we can do that with Edvinsson, then theoretically we should be able to do that with Cossa as well. And you're right, they obviously missed some significant talent. I think that for a lot of Red Wings fans, the fact that the Red Wings traded up to pick Cossa at 15th, and then the Dallas Stars used the pick they got from Detroit to pick Wyatt Johnston, that's going to be a sore spot for a long time because, what's the number one need in Detroit right now? It's a second line center. And you could argue that Wyatt Johnston's presence would maybe make Larkin the second line center. And that would transform the Red Wings top six, obviously, right? But even the thing with that, though, is that Johnston was one of those prospects that was heavily impacted by the COVID shutdowns. I don't think he played a single game that season. If he did, he played like 8 games. Like he didn't play a lot of hockey that season. So the Stars picking him where they picked him, it was definitely a bit of a gamble. And it was a gamble that they were able to take because it's 23rd overall versus 15th overall, right? There's just a bit more of like there's just a bit more risk you're willing to take when you're down the draft board than when you're up towards the upper half of it. But yeah, it's not like Wyatt Johnston in that draft was, people were saying this guy's a bona fide top 6 center. He might even be a 1C. You got to draft this guy. No, that was not the motion around him. It's just unfortunate that, things played out the way they did for the Red Wings' sake. And then the other thought I'll throw out here too is that I agree. The under Steve Yzerman, the Red Wings amateur scouting has done better. You mentioned first round picks that have kind of outperformed their draft slot. Even though there's not a ton of them at the NHL level yet, there are actually quite a few picks outside of the first round too that look like they will have long NHL careers. Albert Johansson's kind of the first one that really looks like that, and Carter Mazur looks really good. You named a few of them. There's going to be Emmett Finney. There's a lot of guys that were picked outside of the first round pick that are the first round that will have long NHL careers, and they've done a good job kind of rebuilding. Really, I don't know how else to phrase it. The whole goal of rebuilding is to accumulate talent, right? And be able to add players to your organization that will one day become NHL players. I think that they've successfully done that. Like you said, you can kind of argue about, you can debate whether some of their picks were the right choice in terms of chasing ceilings and whatnot. And you can argue, if they have a game breaker, if in their organization at all outside of the already established ones, but they have done a good job of accumulating talent that will play at the NHL level to some degree. Now that they've set the foundation and they have something sturdy to build on, now is where they're going to have to start getting a little frisky, maybe gambling a little bit, because the only way they're going to get a game breaker, unless they just get super lucky, which can happen, is if they're willing to gamble and chase upside. There's definitely been players over the past few years that, they're seen as boom or bust prospects, high ceiling, low floor. But if they hit, they could really be, a game breaker. I'm thinking of, like Cole Yzerman from a couple years ago. He kind of had that profile. Brad Lambert a couple years ago. There's always at least one in the first round that kind of has that profile. And there's more and more of them as you get down through any given draft. And I think that now is the time where the Red Wings probably need to identify those types of players and start swinging, because like I said, if they're going to get a game breaker, they're now at a point where they can't necessarily rely on getting top 10 picks to get one. Or at least they shouldn't be in that phase anymore. So if they're not going to be picking in the premium range, they're going to have to adjust their draft strategy accordingly.
Well, they're definitely going to have to do that this year now that they don't have a first round pick due to the Justin Falk trade. I also think, it's also a combination of not just the amateur scouting department with the Red Wings, but the pro scouting, and the pro scouting under Yzerman's tenure has also been a little meh. Maybe not meh, more sketch. You look at guys like Justin Holl, Eric Gustafson, Travis Hamonic, Comfort, Alex Lyon going, look what he's doing in Buffalo. Mason Appleton, Tarasenko, James Reimer. A lot of these guys didn't hit. I think it's a combination of that. I also think it's a combination of trying to get players to come to Detroit through free agency. Yzerman mentioned this year that they didn't even get a chance to talk to guys like Marner. There was the Trouba situation where Trouba didn't, looks like he nixed that trade and would preferred Anaheim over, his hometown team, state where he's from. So I think there's a lot of different ingredients that went into this bad soup that have gotten that basically sums up where the Red Wings are right now. And I know patience is thin, but it's going to keep going. The team's not going away, but it's just going to take longer than we had hoped. And I'm not sure I'm optimistic about next season either as well, after seeing how this team performed down the stretch this past season. I do want to go back to a point, though, that you brought up about Sebastian Cossa, and that's where we're going to try to head to next year before we wrap. But Frank Seravalli said today that he thinks Cossa is on the move. And I'm curious, as someone who lives in Grand Rapids and follows the Griffins religiously like yourself, kind of like what happened with Cossa this year? Because, he seemed the season started out great with him. Everything went the Grand Rapids Griffins way this year. Historic record, historic start. But, we've now seen Michal Postava move into that number one role. I'm curious what you think, like what happened with Cossa? I know you say you haven't given up on him, but what's kind of happened? What's changed with him as far as what we thought of him as a prospect at the beginning of the season towards, now where we're seeing these rumors that, he could be on the move. Also, I don't, take everything you hear from Frank Seravalli with a grain of salt, but you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. So there is kind of a hockey nationwide disconnect on Sebastian Cossa right now. And the reason why I say that is because we've in recent weeks we've seen The Athletic rank Sebastian Cossa as the Red Wings' top prospect. Just today or yesterday, I saw another outlet, I believe it was McKean's Hockey, rank Sebastian Cossa as the Red Wings' top prospect. And I think that if you were to poll a lot of other people in the prospect realm, they would have Sebastian Cossa ranked, if not at the top, very, very close to it. I think that the general sentiment on Sebastian Cossa is still that he is a damn good prospect. And I think that is the truth. It's kind of a combination of factors here. First and foremost, I think it needs to be stated that despite how the season ended, Sebastian Cossa still had the most successful AHL season of his career so far. He was a second time AHL All-Star this season. Had it not been for his kind of late season skid, he'd probably rank top 3 in almost every AHL goaltending category. Like it very much, what happened here is that Cossa, he's destined to be a Red Wing because he kind of cooled off in the month of March. And meanwhile, his running mate, Michal Postava, caught fire in the month of March. And the Griffins did the smart thing, and they started to ride their hot hand. And that was Postava. And then the playoffs start, and they ride the hot hand. And so far, Postava has not done anything to lose the net. I feel like there's a lot of people that will reject this because it feels like a cop-out. But this is very much a situation where it's not so much about what Kossa's not doing and more so about what Postava is doing. Postava's kind of put himself on the map here. He's made the conversation interesting because a month ago, the backup spot next season behind John Gibson's was Kossa's to lose. And I think you can still make the argument that it is Kossa's to lose still. But just since March, Postava's made the conversation interesting. I get where Seravalli's coming from, and I get why a lot of people are going to be pointing in that direction for the next, probably until training camp, right? Or until something happens. Because it's an easy conclusion to jump to. If Postava's the guy in Grand Rapids and he's, inspiring confidence, Steve Yzerman mentioned at season end, at his season end presser, that he wanted to wait until the end of AHL playoffs to kind of make a decision on what he wanted to do behind Gibson next season. And if Postava is the only one playing in the playoffs, then he's the only one that you can, I guess, confidently really make a call on, or at least like he finished at the top of the depth chart in Grand Rapids, so you would logically think that he would be the one to move up. But obviously, there's a little bit more nuance to the conversation than that. But so with all of that being said, and Trey Augustine being there, and the countless other goaltenders that are also in the Red Wings system, and then also the Red Wings' stated goal of wanting to really give their team a makeover and address their issues and make a big move. You have to give to get. And it's easy to point to Cossa as a premium asset the Red Wings can potentially deal to then acquire the type of help that all the chatter is going around right now that they need to acquire. He's just an easy piece to fit into that potential deal. So um, I'll reiterate, I still believe in Sebastian Cossa. I still think that the only thing that kind of gives me, I guess, pause about the situation is the waiver situation. Obviously, Cossa needs to pass through waivers next season if he's going to be assigned to the AHL, and that's not an option, quite frankly. He will get claimed if the Red Wings go that route. So either they need to get really comfortable with Cossa having that spot behind Gibson, or something's going to happen one way or another. So um, it's a I've given an answer, but I'm going to end on a non-answer. We still got to wait to the end of the playoffs and probably a few weeks after then to kind of get to really know where this is headed.
Yeah, and I'm curious if maybe he could be a trade piece that could help the Red Wings trade back into the first round in this upcoming draft, since they don't have a first-round draft pick. And that could also be a reason why Steve Yzerman built up this goaltender depth in the organization, because they're gonna need to make a trade for a significant impact player at some point. And yes, you are right. The Cossa could be a guy that is the featured part of that deal. If you're going after someone else, it's probably going to take more if you're going for the bigger name. But I think the starting point, this organization could afford to lose Cossa when you have guys like Postava and Augustine coming along the way too. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. There's going to be there's a lot of work to be done between now and the draft. And I think we're going to see significant changes. Something that Red Wings fans should be excited about, but at the same time, I understand the frustration. It's been a long time. All right, we're going to wrap it up here, but before we let you go, I just want to remind you one more time where you could find us. Check us out on YouTube at The Flying Octopod. Our Twitter page is at Flying Octopod. Also on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about draft strategy. Might even get into some prospect profiles yet, and I know that's Devin's fucking favorite thing to do. So, any last thoughts, bud?
Go Pistons and go Tigers.
Go Pistons. The Tigers are absolutely horrible.
Yep.
We'll end it on that note. Thanks for watching episode 82, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Flying Octopus podcast. Follow us on YouTube at the Flying Octopus channel and Twitter at Flying Octopod.